What is up, y'all? Riley here. Kodansha has announced that they're going to be reprinting Shaman King, but is it worth picking up? Stay tuned, we'll talk about that. Alright, so before we start talking about Shaman King and Kodansha's reprint of that, let's do the usual shoutouts. Number one, I want to give a big thanks to all of my Patreon subscribers. You guys are awesome and you help me to make this channel what it is. If you enjoy what I do on this channel and would like to help me out as well, there's a link down below to my Patreon. You can check that out, see all the different tiers and all the different rewards you get. There's behind the scenes notes and stuff for my videos, exclusive reviews and stuff that are only on my Patreon, only available to subscribers. And then every month I'm going to be doing a live stream exclusive to the $5 tier patrons. The first live stream I'm going to be doing this month is going to be available to all of my patrons, and then after that it will be just for the $5 tier patrons. So go ahead and sign on up. There's plenty of cool stuff there, so I hope that you'll do that to help me out, most importantly, in making this channel the best it can be. And then number two, I want to shout out to the Omnibus Collectors Network. I join a bunch of awesome YouTubers over on that channel, and we talk about comics, manga, movies, TV shows, video games, whatever we want to talk about. Multiple shows every single week. Awesome stuff, awesome content. So if you like what I do here, then go ahead and subscribe over there. And if you're new to my channel or you just haven't done it yet, please hit that subscribe button down below so you can be notified of all the awesome content that I produce every single week. Now let's talk about the subject of today's episode, Shaman King. So Kodansha has announced, it's not new news anymore. I know some people might have not heard, but they've announced that they're going to be reprinting Shaman King. This comes out of things that have been happening for the past couple years. I think back in 2018, it was announced that Shueisha no longer had the rights to Shaman King in Japan, and instead it went over to Kodansha, which means that in the US, Viz no longer had the rights to the series, and then it goes over to Kodansha Comics in the US. Now, not much news had come out of this for a while. In Japan, they were getting new reprints physically of the series, but then eventually they announced that they were going to be doing a new anime adaptation, which is awesome because I think the original anime didn't adapt the entire series, so that's going to be good for fans and to attract new fans too. And then eventually Kodansha in the US announced they were going to be releasing the entire series, including the last 3 volumes, which were never made available in English, on Comixology to read digitally, which is awesome. Like I said, those last 3 volumes were never made available in English. The series had ended with volume 32 because the creator, Hiroyuki Takei, had decided that he needed to basically take a break. So he stopped doing the series, and then several years later, he came back and ended the story with these last 3 volumes. So those are finally available in English. Now, not too long after that, I want to say a week or 2 later, Kodansha had announced they had some big Shaman King news coming, and so obviously most people, I know for myself, I was like, they're probably going to announce a reprint. So I tried to make a video about Shaman King weeks ago to kind of get ahead of the news, and it was going to be one of my, it was going to be the second installment of my Rare But Worth It series, where I talk about rare manga and rare comics and say whether or not it's worth the price or the time invested to track that stuff down. And I was going to do one about Shaman King, and I was going to talk about that, and at the end of the video say, while this is rare now, there's a good chance that Kodansha winds up doing a reprint. So, you know, hold your horses on trying to spend a lot of money on the original Shonen Jump versions because it might come back and it might be cheaper. As I was finishing editing on that video, the news popped up, and I decided instead of just inserting me talking about the news in that video, I decided to scrap the whole thing and start from scratch. And it took me a few weeks because I had other videos that I wanted to line up before that, but now I'm finally here and we're going to talk about Shaman King. I'm going to talk about what the reprint is, what it's going to be like, and then also talk about the series itself so that people can kind of get an idea whether or not they want to pick it up themselves. So Kodansha announced the reprint, and it's not just a normal one-for-one reprint of the standard volumes, the ones that you see behind me. They're actually doing 3-in-1 omnibus editions. Now, here's all of the information. It's going to be 3-in-1 omnibus editions. There's going to be 11 total volumes. The first 2 volumes are having a simultaneous release right now scheduled for February of 2021. And then after those 2 volumes come out in February, they're going to do another volume every 2 months. So they're going to wrap up publishing the entire series sometime in 2022. So they're definitely trying to push these out at a pretty quick pace. Now, on top of all of those 11 omnibus editions of the original series, going not just through 32, but all 35 volumes. They're also going to digitally release all of the spin-off titles and all the, sequel stuff that has never been released in English either. So those are going to be digitally available on Comixology. They might already be on there. I have no idea. I haven't checked myself. Anyway, so 11 books, $20 a piece, starting February and going through some point in 2022. Now, there was some question about what these were going to look like before, and I did a little bit of research. And by research, I mean I looked at the catalog that Kodansha had released, and I found that the measurements were going to be the same as a standard volume of manga. So they're not going to be oversized. It's not going to be the format size that like the Viz signature books are in. It's going to be a normal volume of manga. Now the question is, what paper stock are they going to use? Are they going to use the thin stock of paper that they use on Viz Media's 3-in-1 volumes? Or is Kodansha going to use something closer to what they use for their normal volumes of manga? If they use normal stock paper, it's going to be a really chunky paperback. If they use the thinner stock, then you can expect it to be about double size like the Viz Media 3-in-1 Omnibus are. So I will say I'm a little bit disappointed on that. I was hoping that they'd be oversized, but instead it's going to be the same trim as these books. But just showing the paper stock, this is a lot thicker than the paper stock of those other ones. They have a much thinner stock of paper on those omnibus editions. I don't know personally. I haven't, in my collection at least, I don't have any Kodansha books with really thin paper stock, so I don't know. Someone out there might comment down below and say, like, actually, this series has really thin paper. This might be closer to what they are going to resemble. But we know the dimensions, so there's that. Now, if you are already an owner of the Shaman King manga, like myself, you might ask basically, should I go ahead and upgrade or downgrade as it may be considering the paper stock? Just for what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to buy at least those first two when they first come out and kind of just compare and contrast. And I'll probably do a video later on when they do come out next year to compare and contrast the original printing volumes to the new ones. Now, of course, the main reason why you might want to grab the new ones is because the new ones will have those volumes that were never before printed. So the thing is that those last 3 volumes, unless they move around the contents of some of the books, like if the first volume is a 2-in-1 instead of, but I think they've already confirmed the first one's going to be the first 3 volumes. Or maybe they do something where the 2-in-1 volume is somewhere in the middle of the series. Basically, you're going to wind up having volume 11 is going to be the last 2 volumes, which means you have to pick up volume 10, which would have volumes 31, 32, and 33. So what I'm saying is, if all you want is the printed version of those last 3 volumes, you're going to have to buy 2 volumes, and you're going to have volume 10, including 2 volumes that you might already have if you own the original volumes of the series. So for me, like I said, I want to pick up those first 2 editions when they come out because I want to be able to compare and see what stock of paper they use, how nicely the reprint is, if they've done anything to clean the artwork or anything like that. Not like the series needed to clean the artwork, but those are things that I'm curious about. And that's where we're really going to be able to judge whether those volumes are worthwhile or not. Now, the cool thing is, it looks like Kodansha's pretty committed to this. They've already released the fact that they're going to be releasing them every other month, and they've already announced that they were going to be ending in 2022. So that's the first really good part, is we know that they're committed. I just wish that they would have used an increased size, but you can't win them all. So anyway, for those of y'all who don't know what Shaman King, let's talk about that. Shaman King was a shonen manga published in the late 90s to the early 2000s, I think were the years on that, with art and writing by Hiroyuki Takei. Hiroyuki Takei is known mostly for this series. He's done a couple of other things. From Shonen Jump, he did do Ultimo, which was a superhero type series in conjunction with Stan Lee. Takei had an idea with this series to basically, he wanted to use a focus that was different from the stuff that we would typically see from manga. So instead of using, for a fighting shonen manga, a lot of the stuff that was contemporary to it would have been stuff like One Piece and Naruto and, Dragon Ball Z, Rurouni Kenshin, all of these series, kind of using familiar types of focuses, samurai, ninja, stuff like that. Instead, he wanted to focus on something new, and he landed on using shamans. So he wanted to use shamans, and he titled it Shaman King because he said that there was no good alternative word in Japanese that elicited the same feeling that the word shaman does. And it was essentially a look at these characters who have a connection to the afterlife. Now, the characters in the series, the shaman, basically are able to connect to a certain spirit, and they find that one spirit that connects with them, and they use that spirit to fight. So the focus on the series with these shaman is that they all enlist in the shaman fight, and they are all trying to become the Shaman King, as the title suggests. And this Shaman King gets to connect with the Great Spirit, and with the power of the Great Spirit, the Shaman King is going to be able to kind of shape the world at their own will. So we follow our main character, Yo Asakura. And Yo Asakura is a really laid-back dude who is connected to a ghost called Amidamaru. And Amidamaru is the ghost of a samurai. So he wears typical samurai garb, he has a sword and all that good stuff. And Yo is being trained by his fiancée, Anna. And Anna is trying to make sure that he wins. Her role is really pushing him really hard to train to be a great shaman so that he can win the shaman fight. And Yo really doesn't seem like he cares about it in the series because he's so laissez-faire about everything. And he claims that his reasoning behind wanting to be the Shaman King is because he wants to be able to live a laid-back and relaxed life. I'll get back to that point later because he's not exactly being honest there. So as the series goes forward, there's a lot of different typical manga, shonen manga tropes, fighting a lot of different enemies, meeting a lot of friends, meeting some enemies that become friends, and kind of creating this group of all the characters that they've met before to go forward to face off against a bigger force of evil. So in the shaman fight, we get to see characters from all across the globe because in that we're focusing on something like shamanism, which I guess it's better put to say you focus on spirituality. There's a big focus on spirituality, and these characters from around the globe are represented in how their cultures and how their religions and stuff connect to the spirit world and connect to the afterlife. So we have characters from not just Japan and also places like China and Germany. We have a character from London, we have characters from America, we have Native American characters, we have characters from all over the globe, and each one of them is represented with their different styles in the way that not only that they connect to the afterlife, representing, the kind of things that we might see in different cultures and religions from across the globe, but also we get these characters that are very different looking in appearance. They're made to look very different from one another by wearing clothes that resemble in some way, I'm not going to say that they're exactly like, but that resemble in some manner the clothes that people from those cultures wear. Which was a really cool part about Shaman King because, especially at the point when I was reading the series starting back in 2003, 2004, whenever it was first brought over to the US, I'd never really been exposed to a manga that was that diverse, let alone many comics or other things that were that diverse. Now, it's far from perfect in its diversity, and I'll come to the major issue with that in a little bit in the video, but I had to appreciate the fact that Takei was trying harder than any other creator that I had seen, that I'm not saying that it didn't exist, but that I had seen as a kid at that time. I was a young teenager, and it was very new to me. I was used to, as far as anime went, stuff that was focused either in a fictional land or something focused basically on Japan. And it was really cool to see something very different. And it gave us characters that were very different from each other, so it was easy to differentiate between the cast members of this series. And each one of them had their own motivations, each one of them had their own styles of fighting, each of the shaman characters have their own spirit that partners with them, so there's a lot of diversity with the cast in many different ways, which I think is a big plus on the side of this series. So, as I mentioned, each of these characters has a different reason why they want to win the shaman fight and become the Shaman King. And we find out a little bit later in the series that Yo's reasons that he states at the beginning are not exactly true. Yo actually wants to become the Shaman King because he wants to help create a better world. Now, Yo, as with many shonen protagonists, underwent some trauma as a child, and he grew up basically being very alone. And as he's grown, he's made these attachments, and he makes a lot of these very strong attachments to the characters as they're introduced, as he makes his group of friends. Another shonen trope is they make a group of friends, and friendship winds up being one thing that is really a strong driver for the motivation of the main character. So he makes this group of friends, and he's no longer alone, and he wants to create a world where people don't have to suffer the same way that he did, where people no longer have to be alone. But the main antagonist of the series, who's introduced a little bit later on, is another shaman by the name of Hao. And Hao has a mysterious connection to Yo. We find out about later on. I don't want to spoil that for anyone who hasn't experienced it, but there is a connection between the two characters. And Hao wants to become the Shaman King because of his own tragedy. His tragedy has made him decide that the world would be better off if there were no humans in it, because humans are the ones that cause suffering. Humans are the ones that are killing the earth, who are harming the animals, and he wants to have a world that has no humans, essentially. I'm really dumbing things down here for the sake of a synopsis. And here are a little bit of spoilers here, but let's just say that Hao and Yo have a very similar tragedy that has happened to them. They have very similar tragic moments that motivate them in what they want to do as the Shaman King. And I think that there is a beautiful duality between those two characters, something that is really great in having a protagonist and antagonist who are such opposites from each other, but who come from the same tragic moment in their past. You have characters who are inspired in completely opposite ways to move forward from what they experienced when they were younger. And I think that that really is an important driving factor in why this series has such a great antagonist. And it's one that you look at in a different way than a lot of different antagonists that you would see in manga, where a lot of times you see a character and they explain where they're coming from, but it's something that you might not exactly get behind, or it's something that maybe you do get behind. You understand why they're doing what they're doing, but the motivations are different from the protagonist. The motivations are always different from the protagonist, so you follow this kind of sense of this villain is this way because something different happened to them when they were younger, or something different happened to them previously before the story started. If they had been similar to the protagonist, then maybe they would have ended up differently. But in this series, it's a very different look at that type of thing, because the protagonist and antagonist, you look at them in the same light. You look at them as being something very human, in that the same instance, the same thing can happen to multiple different people in real life and affect each person very differently. It can make one person and another person complete opposites of each other. One person could be motivated for good and one person could be motivated for bad by the same thing. It's something that I talked about in a previous video about the series Inuyashiki. The series Inuyashiki has an event that happens to two different people, and one of those people decides that what happens to him is going to motivate him to be better. It's going to motivate him to fight for good, while the other person decided the complete opposite. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed that about Inuyashiki, and I really enjoy that concept when it comes to Shaman King as well. So those are some of the aspects about the series that I really enjoyed. The duality handled so well between the antagonist and the protagonist, and the very extreme diversity that it shows with its characters, and the attempts at displaying different cultures respectfully. Now, I say attempts, and I mentioned earlier that there is one big, glaringly obvious problem with this series, and this is in its very harmfully racist portrayal of a certain character. And I didn't want to make this video and make it all praise for Shaman King and then completely just gloss over the fact that this character exists. And that is the character as he's originally known in the Japanese, Choco Love McDonald. Choco Love, in the American version, they changed his name to Joko, obviously trying to step away from a name that has kind of a racist connotation behind it. He's a character from America. He is a young black boy who is very stereotypically shown. He's got much rounder features. He has a round nose, big rounded lips, he has an afro, and he has a big rounded belly, looking almost like he's supposed to be a malnourished kid. Pretty bad depiction, considering they don't have a lot of black characters in this series. They have a lot of Asian characters and a lot of white characters from different countries, and they even have Native American characters, but then they have very few black characters, and with this one, they really don't do a good job of doing a positive portrayal. So Joko also comes from a background where he was a troubled kid that was in a gang, and he also is supposed to represent, because I mentioned that there are a lot of representation of different cultures, from different countries, and for whatever reason they decide to have one character that's meant to represent not just a Black American character, but he's also meant to represent African shamanism. So you get two things merged into one character instead of trying to create a character that represents shamanism as it comes from African cultures and also a character that comes from like American stuff, but instead they just shove it into one character. So in the English adaptations, they tried to fix this by, I think they slightly changed his appearance by not making the lips as blackface looking. And of course they changed his name, like I said. So I don't know if the new anime, this has been a point of discussion that I've seen online already, is whether or not the new anime is going to be trying to change that character even more, if they're going to do something to change his appearance even more, or if they're going to try and change his backstory a little bit to make it a little bit less harmful of a stereotype. And it's something that I know some people out there will be like, they shouldn't change the source, they shouldn't do whatever. It's been done before. There are a lot of series that have done things to try and change and move away from harmful stereotypes. For instance, at the top of my head is one of the characters from Cyborg 009. In later adaptations of that series, one of those characters who's in the original manga is a pretty bad blackface caricature of a Black character, is changed in appearance to not be such a racist character anymore. So I'm hoping that they do that, and I'm also wondering what Kodansha is going to do about the portrayal of that character in the new translation of the manga. Are they going to try and adjust some of the translation to change a little bit of his past? Are they going to adjust the art to make him not appear so stereotypical? That's a big question, and it's a very important question. Now, Shaman King is a series that I absolutely loved when I was reading it growing up, when I was in high school, but even for something that you love, it's important to acknowledge their faults, and it's extremely important to acknowledge their faults when it's something that is as bad as this is. I don't believe that Takei desired to have a very racist and stereotypical character appear in the series, and I think that he was intending on making a diverse cast that was supposed to respect different cultures and people from different countries, but he might have not done enough research on this one. And I don't want to point him out and say that he needs to, he's problematic and needs to be canceled or something, but I think that it's important to learn from this moving forward, and this is a point where on this series I think that Takei needed to learn, and if he hasn't already learned, then hopefully with the resurgence of Shaman King and the return to the franchise, that Takei will see, there is a lot to learn from this. Now, I'd say that big highlight of this series is Takei's sense of style when it comes to the art. And Takei really was, it's very obvious he was inspired by kind of a graffiti style, and inspired by hip-hop and rap culture in the way that he outfits a lot of his characters, especially looking at Yo as a character. It's clear where there's a lot of inspiration. He has a style that's a little more caricaturized when compared to other popular shonen manga like Naruto or One Piece, where the characters there have very typical normal proportions, but in Shaman King they're usually displayed with larger heads, slightly larger hands and feet. Not to the point where the hands and feet are as big as like the characters in Hoshinengi, which are just ridiculous proportions, but they are more like a caricature, which lends itself really well to a series like this that is a high energy kinetic action title like a lot of shonen are. I want to compare the artwork in this series that Hiroyuki Takei has to similar type of caricaturized styles in American comics, such as Humberto Ramos, who's done a lot of work on Spider-Man or his creator-owned series Crimson. He has that same type of caricaturized style, which works well in some cases when you're looking at a character like Spider-Man, who often has high energy, fast-paced action in a lot of his books, but it might not lend itself as well to a crime comic where there's not as much high energy action happening around the pages. So is Shaman King worthwhile? Is it worth picking up? The good news is you can very easily make that decision for yourself because the series is available digitally now via Comixology. So it's going to be cheap and easy to have access to try out a volume or two. The other good news is Kodansha is doing well to release the series quickly and in affordable volumes, so it's easier to kind of make that first plunge and try out a volume or two of the series and make up your mind whether or not it's for you. I think if you enjoy shonen titles, if you are a fan of stuff like big shonen titles, Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, stuff like that, you'll probably find a lot to enjoy here because the series does focus on a lot of those typical shonen tropes, the ones that, I've discussed throughout this video. But at the same time, I think it has a lot to offer as a very individualized series, including the desire to have very diverse of a cast, the desire to explore different cultures, the very different art style that Takei has compared to a lot of other shonen characters, and also the really very fantastic dichotomy between the protagonist and the antagonist. These are all the parts that, to me, make this special and make this stand out on its own. So, what do I think? I think it's a great series, and I think it's worth a shot. If you're a fan of shonen manga, check it out. If you're not a fan of shonen manga, it's probably not going to make you a shonen fan. It's not the series that's going to tip you over and make you say, okay, I think I'm going to try shonen from now on. This isn't that series. But it is a good, solid manga, and I am so happy that it's going to be reintroduced and be available for a new audience to try for the first time. So that's what I have to say about Shaman King. I hope that this video helps to make a couple people maybe try the series out for the first time. I hope that it maybe sheds some light on the series for some people who knew nothing about it. And I hope that maybe now people who are on the fence about whether they should be picking up those new editions from Kodansha or not, now know whether or not they want to. That's what I'm aiming to do with this video. So if you got any of that out of it, then this video is a success and I'm happy. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around in this video with me. I appreciate everyone for taking the time out of their day to spend with me and spend with these videos. If you enjoy what you saw here, then please click that subscribe button down below so you can get notified on all the awesome videos that I have coming out in the future. I do a video on manga and a video on comics every week, and I also do a video talking about weekly new issues. So check those out, and I'll be back soon with more awesome content for manga and comic lovers alike. I'll see you next time. Peace out.